Hey everyone and welcome to a new video. So we seem to be heading towards some sort of climax in the Psychic Awakening campaign, with the trailer for the book Pariah suggesting that the Imperium and the galaxy overall is on course for a final requiem of sorts. Now some people are worried that this might be leading towards an end times event, and I can see why, but I'm not entirely convinced. The end times was a way of replacing Warhammer Fantasy at a time when it was struggling to pull its weight financially, allowing Games Workshop to reset the universe but not the models it produces. And we're not really in that position with 40k, far from it actually. It's never been more popular. However, I do hope that this chapter ends with some sort of profound consequence, an ending that leaves a scar or lasting impression on the universe that has borne it thus far. Now this sense of impending conclusion has me thinking about what's next, and like some others, I feel that it's more likely than ever that it will be followed with a revised edition of Warhammer 40k. The reason I've been thinking that is thanks to an event board that I saw a few months ago in my local Games Workshop. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a picture to share, which is a bit frustrating, but I will try and share one if I can soon. But I do appreciate that you're taking my word on this one for now, but stick with me because I'll be fleshing out this idea as I go through the video. But there were 3 events on the board covering the spring-summer season. There was a Warriors of Light event in April, something Brawlers event, I couldn't remember the name exactly, in May, and a Blood and Resurrection event in June. Now, at the time, I suspected that each of these first 2 events were references to the Lumineth Realm Lords and the Sons of Bahamut respectively, and actually, it's these events that got me wanting to talk about the Sons of Bahamut in the first place. But now that it seems that the first 2 events in April and May seem to follow the intended release pattern of both those factions, I've been drawn to wondering what was meant to be coming in June, and what therefore might be getting previewed at the next Warhammer preview event in May. And my thinking is that at that preview event, we'll start to see the next version or edition of Warhammer 40k take shape. But why would we want a new edition of 40k now? Well, the current edition is, I feel, getting quite bloated. We've got numerous FAQ documents, each for the core rulebook, codexes, individual chapter supplements, and even many of the Psychic Awakening books. In essence, there's been a lot of patching across the books. That said, I'm not suggesting that we're going to get sweeping codex revisions. I actually think Games Workshop is quite happy with the heart of the core rules, so this is more a case for edition 8.5 more than anything else. That said, a new revision would certainly help to incorporate the 15-page core rules FAQ and address any other issues that have arisen since that document was published in September last year. In addition, the end of the Psychic Awakening campaigns will hopefully bring us to a profoundly different place than what is covered in the current rulebook. Since then, we've had new factions released and fleshed out, including the Chaos Knights and Sisters of Battle, and all of the campaign books from Vigilus to Pariah will have seen the balance of power and the stories of characters change significantly. Effectively, the timeline has very much moved on, and the core rulebooks are as much about offering insight into the universe for new and existing players as they are about teaching the rules. So we need an update soon just in that respect, because most of us haven't bought every single Psychic Awakening book. So where do you go for that summary, particularly if you're coming to the hobby for the very first time? And we can't forget that 8th edition is now almost 3 years old, which would, in many people's eyes, make it ripe for a refresh. But why do that now as opposed to the end of the year once the Psychic Awakening books have had some room to breathe? Well, it seems that Games Workshop do rather enjoy summer releases for both 40k and Age of Sigmar, which are usually just before the traditional summer holiday periods. And in 2017 they revealed Dark Imperium in May and made it available for pre-order on 3rd of June, so they can move pretty quickly when it comes to these big releases. Now, given it's the end of April right now, it does seem rather tight to suggest that we could get all 3 Psychic Awakening books and a new edition of 40k by the end of June. Clearly, the current situation has thrown that whole schedule out of the window. However, if we consider that we've had a new Psychic Awakening book every month, excluding December, but we got 2 in November, then we would have got Engine War, War of the Spider, and Pariah in April, May, and June, respectively. And that would leave the story wide open for us to ask, what's next? And then bam, we get a new edition of 40k that tells us what the major threats are, or at least suggests what is looming in the void. Again, the timescales are anyone's to guess right now, but given the prevalence for June release dates for the latest editions of both 40k and Age of Sigmar, again it's around the time when a lot of younger kids and adults are looking for something to play, then Psychic Awakening would pave the way nicely to a similar event 3 years on from the last edition. So that's just a few of the reasons why I think we're ripe for a new 40k edition. But why is the Blood and Resurrection title relevant? Well, if we are getting a new edition, I sense that that title, which again I simply got from glancing at a Games Workshop events board, could be suggesting that we'll see the Blood Angels go up against the Necrons. Now the 2 factions have a bit of a history. In the short story Word of the Silent King, the 2 were engaged in a bitter conflict, only to end up working together to stop an invading host of Tyranids. And towards the end of the book, apologies I will drop a spoiler here, it's revealed that the Silent King and Sanguinius had some sort of alliance. Now, could we see this revelation form the basis of a new conflict, and would that make a good box set? Well, while the story is great, it largely depends on the models, but we have potentially seen some already. In this pixelated image, which has been around for quite a while, we can potentially make out a new Primaris Landspeeder painted in what seems to be Blood Angel's colours, and some new Primaris bikers lurking in the background. In addition, with the Necron Psychic Awakening book being called Pariah, and Games Workshop's tendency to have new releases packaged exclusively in box sets before individual release is not something I like, how might new Necron Pariah models emerge on the tabletop? I don't think we'd get a model set like Prophecy of the Wolf, given that that one was only released relatively recently. Obviously this is just a hunch, but I think that just as Dark Imperium ushered in the core Primaris and Shadowspear introduced the Vanguard Primaris forces, I think 9th edition, or whatever you want to call it, could bring in the fast attack equivalent, bring in Primaris Landspeeders, bikes, and hopefully jump assault troops, the sorts of units that would be perfect for White Scars, Dark Angels and Raven Guard Primaris players. And finally, there's a really obvious question. Why release a new edition now? We've just had a ton of new campaign books and rules. And putting aside my point on bringing the lore together, I totally thought the same thing. And it makes me feel that a total rules rework is definitely out of the picture, because it would infuriate literally every player, myself included. But if we cast our eyes back to the close of 7th edition, Games Workshop released all 3 Gathering Storm books at the beginning of 2017, with Rise of the Primarch coming out only 2 months before they announced 8th edition. So Games Workshop isn't against using campaign books to sell a story and to recognise the culmination of an edition before we move on to the next chapter, and I think we're at that point again. Now this situation is vastly different to those Gathering Storm books, since those became completely redundant rules wise once Games Workshop changed how stat lines worked in 40k. I found that a really surprising decision actually, which must have frustrated a lot of players, but thankfully those books had a ton of great lore in them. Here there's far more reliance on the rules in the books. There's certainly not as much story, but it doesn't mean the core rules can't be tidied up a bit to help rebalance, as long as we're in a position where the supplements are still fully functional and valid afterwards. Overall, my point is that while it may seem a bit annoying, the current Psychic Awakening campaign is probably recognising a turning point in 40k, certainly in respects to the story, which will need to be reflected in a core rulebook at some point. But maybe this is a turning point for the rules too, and given where we are with the FAQs and perhaps the current state of play within the game, now is perhaps as good a time as any. But what do you think? I'm certainly not trying to spread rumours or make any promises, but I'm keen to hear if you think a new edition of Warhammer 40k could be coming, and whether now is really the right time. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'm sure we'll find out one way or another during May's preview event, which even Games Workshop has tipped as one we should definitely not miss. But I want to close as always by saying a huge thank you for watching. Please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed it, and I do hope to see you in the next one. But until then, do take care.